On OffTheHookSports.com, your home for real news, real opinions, and what really matters about Tennessee athletics. The Off the Hook podcast at OffTheHookSports.com or Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, or wherever you go for your favorite podcasts. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, Google Play, TuneIn, iHeart. Like, share, follow, subscribe. Off the Hook with Dave Hooker starts now.
Well, Tennessee certainly hoped they picked up an impact defensive end / linebacker / edge rusher over the weekend in Chandavian Bradley. We're going to look at some of the most impactful defensive ends, linebackers, edge rushers in recent history in the SEC and at Tennessee. So like and subscribe if that's the type of thing that gets your juices flowing, because it is us with Chris Landry of Landry Football. I'm Dave Hooker. Go to LandryFootball.com to learn more. So Chandavian Bradley is the first 5-star that Tennessee has had committed, other than some quarterback named Nico, in California since 2019. Both of those are offensive linemen. One is still playing for Tennessee and has been solid. The other is, I had to look it up, in Oklahoma. But so this is, at least since that time, the first defensive player that Tennessee has had step up as a 5-star. And 24/7 has him as a 4-star, but the composite is a 5-star. Anyway, I'll let you determine that. He's a difference maker type of player. I think we all would agree. So who are some of the, before I tell you more about Alice Nest, who are some of the more impactful defensive ends, linebackers, edge rushers in recent history? Just run me down a few names. I imagine you'll probably start with Will Anderson because he's generational special.
Will is great. He's definitely in recent. The two guys, I'm going maybe back a little bit, maybe a little bit too far, but the guy that I hesitate to compare Will to this guy because it's almost unfair, but the best guy I have seen in this conference in terms of difficulty to block. Now, let me give you two guys, but I had the unfortunate task of being a part of the coaching staff to coach against these guys and have to try to block these guys. Derek Thomas was unblockable. I think he was the most disruptive guy. He was, in a stretch in the SEC was like what Lawrence Taylor was in the NFL. He was just, and Derek had a great NFL career, God rest his soul, but he was so disruptive. Wilbur Marshall, Florida, was another one. Was very, very difficult to block. So those are kind of the benchmark guys. Now, that's what I would call modern day, where you had the true edge rushers. You can go back. Reggie White, obviously, for the Vols was just ridiculously good. He played more 5 technique, some 4-eye technique, but Wilbur and Derek were the wide rush guys that they move around and, again, paralyzing the block. So those are kind of the standard bearers. And there were some, we can go on and on, greats of the past that played in a different era and 40 fronts, 30 fronts. But I think Will Anderson is in the category of very, very special. I don't want to put him in the category of Derek Thomas, but if you were to ask me who he's most like, he does remind me of him. We'll see what he can do. Derek had, if I can remember right, Dave, like Wilbur Marshall had a phenomenal career. A Hall of Fame SEC All-American, unbelievable, all over the place, forced to be reckoned with. He had like 23, 24 sacks. Unbelievable. Derek Thomas had 52 in college. He couldn't be blocked. And I saw him, and I've seen him years and studied him. I saw him when he was with the Chiefs against the Chargers. He had like 7 sacks in one game. He literally just like stopped a game, like you would. Lightning would stop a game, and everybody. He just literally stopped the game, like a bad officiating crew that calls a penalty every play. He just stopped the game. It was like back to pass a sack, back to pass. It was just like it was unbelievable what he could do. He was just phenomenal as a college and pro player. But I will tell you that Will Anderson is special. And if you look at Alabama's history under Nick Saban, you've had a lot of good players. You've not had a singular pass rusher that's as good as Will Anderson in Nick Saban's tenure at Alabama. In fact, I would say, and I went back into uh, Michigan State. I don't think he's had anybody in college, and I don't know that he'll come out and say this publicly, but in my opinion, knowing Nick since he coached at Toledo and everywhere and stop, he's not had one guy that he's coached at the college level that's better than this guy in terms of individual skill set, natural ability. Other guys played better, in terms of technique and played linebacker. This guy's a rusher. Is I think the most disruptive guy that he's had singularly. So I'm curious to see how they utilize him.
Well, the scary thing is too, correct me if I'm wrong, but he's really, really good against the run too,
Yes,
which a
he
lot of times
is.
these pass rushers are just about the quarterback and they really don't care if they get pushed around in the run, but
He's so
he
long.
cares.
He's
Yeah.
so long that offensive linemen that are bigger and stronger can't get their hands into his body. That's why when we talk about length, that's what we're talking about with these big linemen. If you're long, you win the leverage battle. So, and he can set the edge very well. And they do such a great job teaching technique and hand usage that when you got that length and you can position yourself, that's what makes him a good run defender is technique and length. The pass rush ability is about the athletic ability and the pass rush moves to counter a couple of moves together. So his speed will force offensive linemen to get wide in their protection, and then he works across their face inside, which basically, if you get a big guy off balance, crossing his feet because they're so concerned about protecting the edge, then the inside is a quicker, shorter path to the quarterback, and that becomes big time problem. You get into third and long, and you got to block this guy. It's going to be a long day. Trust me, anybody that you play against.
It's important to note that he had 27 sacks his final season at Alabama, which sounds I've looked it up literally while we've been talking 3 times, and I wrote it yesterday, and it still doesn't sound right. So there have only been 3 other players get over 18 in the season. We start talking about unbreakable records, and we can talk about 400 as far as hitting percentage with Ted Williams. We can talk about Joe DiMaggio's streak. We can talk about all that stuff, and we can throw all that out there, and that all sounds good. But I can't think of one off the top of my head as far as a single season, 26 sacks. And I'm even going to double check it again. 27 sacks in one college football season. I will put that right up there with the most unbreakable records as far as a single season that we'll ever see in our lifetime.
And think about the pressures on top of that.
Oh,
and
yeah.
How in the fact that you try to make sure that he doesn't beat you, which creates pressure opportunities and sack opportunities for other players on the line. So his presence alone. No, I think this is why a lot of people think, and me included, that this Alabama defense has a chance to be maybe the best that Saban's had. It certainly looks that way talent-wise. We'll see how well they produce.
Yeah, he just was an absolute monster. And with the other players they had on that Alabama defense, they just kind of fed off him. What are some of Tennessee's best pass rushers of all time? We're going to get to that, and I'll remind you, it's brought to you by our friends at Owl's Nest Barbecue. Man, when you go to Owl's Nest Barbecue, you know one thing, that you're going to have a community that's all about giving you the right barbecue supplies, whether we're talking about the grills, whether we're talking about the chips, the wood pellets, the sauces, or the rubs. That's Owl's Nest Barbecue. So looking at Tennessee, I know edge is kind of this new term. And really, in his defense, Jeremy Pruitt, who I don't think is the smartest coach in the world, brought up the fact that to me the first time it really doesn't matter if your hand's down or not. That's kind of the definition of an edge rusher, right? That's why we're using edge instead of DELB.
Yeah, because the way guys do it, even in nickel. So let's just say you're a 3-4 team. Well, in third down, you're a 4-3 team. And so how do you do it? Where's that edge guy coming from? Is his hands up? Is he lined up in a 5 technique, which is outside shoulder of the offensive tackle, or is he stand up? Now the difference is, where does he play? Is he play a little bit off and back, which creates more space between the edge rusher and the tackle, or does he play closer? So that's, to me, it doesn't. He's correct. It doesn't matter in terms of the stance. What matters is where you position, what technique you're playing, how you're lined up, and really it comes down to, what are you more comfortable with? What are you better at? I've used the story that, I mentioned, one of the best pass rushers, I think a really good one that I was around was Javon Curse, was involved in
Hmm.
drafting him. Javon played inside backer at Florida, and they didn't play him down. They didn't even rush him a whole lot, which kind of surprising to me. But when we put him, it was, he was better with his hands down and come out and he was better at that. So how do you do it? It's just basically what you're a little bit more comfortable with in terms of a stance, and there's not a whole lot of difference in the 2-point, 3-point. It's just where you aligned, and that's the real key.
I'm sure we'll forget somebody, but who are the top 2 or 3 just pure pass rushers in Tennessee over the past 25 years? I'm going to ask you that. Brought to you by Steve Ray's Midnite Oil, a proud Michelin distributor, and they worked on my son's car recently, and it's in tip-top shape. So I would highly recommend them at Ottawa. So as far as the top pass rushers in Tennessee history, and they had a pretty good run there. Maybe even a better run if Leonard Little would have played defensive end instead of linebacker. But I'm not going to get into that because John Chavis disagrees with me heavily on that. And I may have been called a name or two about that. But anyway, Chris, who are some of the top 2 or 3 pass rushers as you look back over Tennessee's past 25 years or so?
Well, I mentioned Reggie, and I know that's longer than that, but I can't not mention somebody
Right.
like that. I thought Leonard Little was very good. Now, John Henderson was a power rusher. You got different types of guys, and he wasn't, a true edge guy. But I would say Leonard Little um, was somebody that was really good. Um, I'd have to go back and a little bit further. Um,
They haven't had a really special one
no,
in a while.
it's been a while. I mean, even guys that were good I mean, they've been some good ones, but they've not been what I would call the guys in recent years that I would say these are the best. But not Leonard did a good job. I mean, even in a spot role, Raynoch Thompson did a good job. But pure edge guys, I know the Hainsworth and Henderson was a really good duel, but they were more push the pocket types guys that really were effective pass rushers in terms of technique, in terms of ability to close, but they weren't the pure edge guys in the mold of the guys we're talking about. They wouldn't fit in that category. Leonard Little, I thought, could do things off the edge that was pretty special. Reggie was, to me, it was um, the power in which he displayed, but was very, very athletic. And I thought he developed that hump move, which he just threw guys, you ragdolled them out. He was good, even though you wouldn't classify him as that pure edge guy, because he lined up in a lot of 4-eye technique at Tennessee. He was just a terror off the edge as a rusher.
Yeah, he was pretty darn good. Would he be an edge guy now, or would he just be a defensive end?
Now he'd be a defensive end. You'd
Yeah,
play him as he's a 5 technique. Like for example, people ask me all the time, Reggie White, Bruce Smith. I said, well, both played same time. Both great defensive linemen, but both defensive ends. And they say, well, same different positions. Reggie played a 5 technique. So Reggie White played outside the tackle's shoulder. So he worked the edge. Bruce Smith, they lined him inside the tackle's shoulder. So I like this one better than that, but you got to understand the difference. Reggie was a little bit better from the outside in closing, but Bruce Smith got unbelievable sack numbers. And Dave, he didn't get outside the tackle's shoulders. He had to work against 2 guys all the time, a guard and a tackle, a guard, a center, and a tackle. Reggie was working against a tackle, maybe a tight end. So different, and so I'm not I'll drive the fence, pick one. Well, I take either one, but I'm going to play them a little differently. But in the case of Reggie was the best, and they both were great leaders too. So, but yeah, so if you're a fan of the Packers or the Eagles, you'd say Reggie White. If you're a fan of the Bills, you'd say Bruce Smith. If you're a fan of Virginia Tech or Tennessee, you'd pick one. But they were a little bit different, and I think that's important to designate, because even though they may be both defensive ends, it's where they align in a 4-eye, a 5, multiple spots. I think all those things determine the ability to have a lot of success. I would equate it to this. If you talk about a running back and you talk about average yards per carry, well, that factors in the offensive line, and it factors in the defense. So how many yards per carry do you get versus running against 8-man fronts versus somebody that's a running back in a spread offense where you're seeing 6-man boxes? Well, you got less guys to block and less traffic, so that guy should have a better per average carry, right? So the yards per carry, it gives you a number, but sometimes it gives you a false equivalent of how a guy was compared to another one, because it's 2 different responsibilities and 2 different roles at the same position.
Well, and thank you for not mentioning Michael Strahan's name, just because the whole fake sack thing with Brett Favre rubs me the wrong way. He's Chris Landry. Go to LandryFootball.com. Owl's Nest Barbecue, your home for barbecue and Steve Ray's Midnite Oil, your home for fair and fantastic car service right there. A proud Michelin distributor. This has been a presentation of Off the Hook Sports.